I'm here with Mary Coloe. Mary's a presentation sister here in Melbourne. She's associated with the University of Divinity, especially the Yarra Theological Union, and all kinds of activities from working for Christian Unity, for adult education, especially in Scripture and St John, throughout various dioceses in Australia. So, hello Mary.
Hello Peter, hello.
I looked you up in the index of the book that we're going to talk about.
Yes.
To see where you appeared, and your first article was in 1992.
That's correct, Peter. At that point, I was a student at YTU. You were one of my lecturers, and I'd written an essay for Tony Kelly, and Tony suggested that I publish it. Shock. So I sent it off. You weren't the editor at that point.
I was.
Were you?
Yes.
Okay. And it was accepted, so it was my first venture into the print media, beginning of a long career of writing, publishing. It was a great thrill, Peter. Great thrill.
And before you ask me any questions about the book,
Right.
I would like to note that your last article in 2011 was on the place of women in the church.
That's correct. And that actually was an article that I had published following on an invitation from Archbishop Battersby to talk to the priests on the 25 years of the Justice Council in Brisbane.
Right.
So I gave an article, Justice, right. A matter of justice and necessity, the place of women in the church. So he was very surprised. But then I published it, and it's been very helpful to people.
Yes, Barry Brundle was the editor
Right,
at that time.
At that time,
Yes.
But Peter, when this book really, I look at the beginning and the end. I always look at beginnings and endings to see the bookends. Who would you say is your audience? So who do you have in mind? Who are you writing or publishing for?
In those days, well, first of all, I'll say Dennis Murphy
Yes.
wanted it to be, I think especially for clergy, that was the mentality, say in the mid-60s.
Uh-huh.
And then the lay people who were being, I suppose, interested in the issues of Vatican II.
Yes.
And he felt that you either had the newspapers, sensational, you had the histories that were written about the council, but he wanted to take up some of the theological issues that were being talked about. So when I inherited it, I think that was the audience that I had in mind. But that changed, I suppose, during the 70s,
Right.
especially, say, as we talk about our involvement with lectures, the Yarra Theological Union and Melbourne College of Divinity, same in Sydney College of Divinity, the various other states. So the students who were going there, and then when they graduated, it's actually quite a target audience.
Yes.
And so
yes.
as that developed during the 70s and into the 80s, I think it also increased the interest in adult education, theology, scripture, catechetics. And so I think as the decades went on, it encompassed, I think, quite a range of people.
Yes, my sense is that it's the Compass, the journal, had in mind the educated Catholic laity who perhaps had never had a chance to do theology, but were interested, could read, could be critical, and you were providing solid information. Because this book reads as a who's who of Australian theologians.
I'm glad it does that. Again, you just reminded me that one of the styles that I liked when I was editor was not just the articles, quite a number of those would come in, and so you could have an issue. But driving around Melbourne, I loved thinking about what would be an interesting theme for an issue of Compass.
Right.
Who'd be the people that I could contact? And I remember hearing, say, programs on the ABC, as one does, and the various people speaking about life issues.
Yes.
I think even Geraldine Doog comes to mind on life matters in those days. Oh, I could ask that person. A whole lot of lay people not to write disquisitions, but a contribution, say, on a particular theme. The person of Jesus, the role of the church,
Yes.
men and women in the church. So our contributors expanded to some extent with that idea.
Yes, and not just the who's who of Australian theologians, and I just note many in this book, but also key themes that are quite critical to think about: Indigenous people, ecology. These are also themes that you've picked up.
That was the interesting thing in '72. Tony Kelly, whom you mentioned,
Yes.
gave a paper towards an Australian theology. And that clicked with me. And I remember in, I think the 4th issue of '72, we had a whole lot of articles on Australian themes, including an article by Pat Dodson, who was a seminarian at that time. And that, I think, became one of the things that pervaded the issues of compass.
Right.
But I find when I was doing the index, a theme, so Eucharist. So you wrote something, I think that 92 was on salvation.
Yes.
And then I look, and for years there mightn't be anything on the Eucharist. It's interesting to look back of what was interesting, say, in 1983 compared with 2005.
What were the issues?
Yes.
Here I notice one of the last issues, church authority, the role of the Pope, the Synod of Bishop, the role of the community, a discussion of the papal encyclical Amoris Laetitia and Sensum Fidelium. I mean, really,
Yes.
the real issues that the church is grappling with.
So we were up to date. That's 2016 when we
That's
finished.
right.
And everything went online,
Yeah.
which we didn't.
Right.
But I'm glad you mentioned that, because I need to hear sometimes with great interest what we actually did, as perceived by somebody like yourself.
Well, I perceive it begins with Vatican II, and then the response to Vatican II to make it available to people, and then the concluding issue is, again, back on the church and the role of the laity, Eucharist for the remarried, ecumenism. All these issues are the bookends for the compass.
Well, I'm glad you said that. I think we'd better bring this conversation to an end. This is a book launch, so
okay.
people are actually going to watch.
Will it go online? Will every article be online?
A lot of the articles are, I'd need to check,
Okay.
because given websites
I know.
and the losing of material, disappearing.
Just somebody reading this book, Peter, is likely to say, oh, I'd be interested in getting that, but they may not have access to a theological college to get the back issues.
Yes.
And so a suggestion would be to get it out there on the World Wide Web.
That's a resolution I will make.
Good.
To find out what can be done. And if you give me the book, I'm going to hold it up to the camera. This is like Philip Adams on Late Night Live when he holds the book up to the microphone. But here is our book, and at the end of any program, there are always the credits. And so I think we'd both like to acknowledge ATF Press and Hilary Regan for all that he has done in bringing this book to fruition.
And the title is?
Oh yes.
Compass Theology Review, a history. 50 years of Australians doing theology. Great title, Peter. Congratulations.
Thanks, Mary.